Welcome to the Fire Swamp at West Ashley. Grab a Bible, check out Isaiah 44, starting in verse 1, going through verse 8. Then follow me on my round as I look to find Christ in this beautiful section. We'll remember that Isaiah 43 ended with a claim that Israel's mediators had failed them, meaning what they needed was a new and better mediator. The failure of their mediators meant that the whole nation was being sent into exile in judgment for their sins. That said, here in chapter 44, verse 1, we see one of those beautiful languages when you're in the middle of a statement of judgment. It says, "But here, the Lord has some good news for his people." Here in chapter 44, the Lord has glorious good news for his people. News of restoration following judgment. The Lord calls them to listen to him. He reminds them of their relationship. The Lord formed them and made them, and he has promised to keep and redeem them. He who formed in the past will help in the future. They should fear not, for God has chosen them as his people. Uh-oh. The Lord promises to undo the curses, to restore their land with water. But more than that, he promises to pour out his spirit on their descendants and their offspring. To have the spirit of the Lord is way better than to have renewed land. Those watered by the Spirit will spring up like grass and like willows on the banks of a stream. They will identify with the Lord's people. They'll be known by his name. Those are beautiful blessings for those who call upon the name of the Lord, who receive this good news. May we be eager to be those descendants, to fulfill this good promise. In verse 6, we see the Lord identify as both the King of Israel and his Redeemer. If we're paying attention, this looks a little bit like the Lord identifying as the Redeemer belonging to the King, a different person, yet still the Lord. The idea that the Lord is both the King and his Redeemer sets up this idea for the truth that Christ is the Son of God and yet fully God. It's totally reasonable for Christ to expect his disciples to have seen Trinitarian theology in the Old Testament. It's there. We just got to slow down and look for the pronouns. For what it's worth, this whole 9 is really poorly designed. Interestingly, the Lord declares himself to be the first and the last. This is exactly the language used by Jesus in Revelation. The Lord declares that there is none like him. The Lord challenges any who might claim to be as he is to come and attempt to meet him on his own terms. But it is the Lord alone who knows all things, who has declared the beginning from the end. He will bring all these things about. The Lord encourages his people to fear not, to trust in him. He will accomplish all of his good purposes. There is no rock besides God. He alone is our strength and shield. There is no God besides our God. We can and must and should put our trust in him, that he will keep his promises. I hope you've been encouraged by this passage to see the Spirit of God poured out on his people, the Lord and his Redeemer, the beautiful truths of the Trinity, the triune God who will redeem his people after judgment. I hope you've been encouraged in this passage to see who God is, that he alone knows the future. He has declared that it will come to pass. Most of all, I pray that it's through faith in Christ that you've received the Spirit, that believers in the New Testament age can be the full fulfillment of this passage, those descendants who identify with God and with his people, who call them by his name. My hope is that in this passage we would see and rejoice in Christ, knowing that he has fulfilled this promise given to Isaiah. May we meditate on his word, considering all that Isaiah 44, 1-8 has to teach us. I hope, too, that you're eager to join me in verse 9 of chapter 44 to see idolatry mocked and condemned. To sum up, my prayer is that you would rejoice in Christ, that you would meditate on his word, and that you might join me again next time.